It began like any other morning in the quiet mountain town of Salida, Colorado. The air was cool, the sun rising behind the snow-tipped peaks, and the streets still half asleep. It was Mother's Day, May 10th, 2020, a day meant for peace, love, and family. Suzanne Morphew should have been surrounded by her daughters smiling, maybe opening cards and flowers, but by evening her name would echo through every news channel, every social feed, every whisper of a community that would never be the same again. Suzanne Morphew was known as a kind, warm woman, the kind of person everyone seemed to like instantly. A devoted mother of 2 teenage daughters, she was often seen jogging through the neighborhood, tending her garden, or posting photos of family moments that painted the picture of a perfect life. She had battled illness, found strength again, and rebuilt herself with quiet courage. To the world, she was the picture of light, a devoted wife, a loving mom, a woman blessed with everything. But that morning, behind her soft smile and gentle eyes, something felt different. She had secrets she could no longer carry. Her husband, Barry Morphew, was known around town as the charming, successful businessman. Strong, confident, always in control, or so it seemed. To many, they were the ideal couple. Good-looking, financially stable, living in a beautiful house surrounded by trees and open sky. But like all perfect pictures, this one had cracks you couldn't see. Not until it broke apart completely. When Suzanne stopped responding to her daughter's messages that day, no one panicked at first. Maybe she was out for a bike ride, they thought. Maybe she just needed some quiet time. But hours passed and still no word. Then came the call that would set off one of the most haunting missing person cases Colorado had ever seen. Barry called police, his voice steady but urgent. He said Suzanne had gone out for a bike ride that morning and never returned. Search teams were dispatched immediately. Helicopters scanned the mountains, volunteers combed the trails, and neighbors joined in, hearts pounding, praying for a miracle. But as night fell, dread began to replace hope. Suzanne's bike was found, but not in a way that made sense. It was discovered down a steep embankment with no sign of a crash, no tracks, no struggle, no blood. It looked placed deliberately. Investigators began to wonder, had she really gone riding at all? Barry told reporters he was out of town on a landscaping job that morning. He said he raced home as soon as he heard Suzanne was missing. He cried on camera, begged for her return, and offered a reward. To some, he looked like a devastated husband, but to others, including the detectives watching closely, something about his performance didn't feel right. The words were there, but the emotion wasn't. In the days that followed, the town of Salida transformed. Posters with Suzanne's smiling face covered store windows and telephone poles. Candlelight vigils were held. Strangers volunteered to search the rugged terrain. Every hour felt heavier than the last. And yet, behind the community's grief, a darker question began to surface. What if this wasn't a disappearance at all? What if the person who should have been searching the hardest already knew she wouldn't be found? As investigators dug deeper, small inconsistencies began to appear, tiny details that didn't add up. Barry said he'd last seen Suzanne early that morning before leaving for work, but her phone data told a different story. The last activity from her device wasn't T during a morning ride. It was late the previous night. The bike that was supposedly part of her morning routine hadn't been used recently, and there were no eyewitnesses who saw Suzanne that day. No one. It was as if she'd vanished before dawn. The Morphew home soon became the center of a forensic storm. Detectives searched the property, scanned the grounds, and questioned everyone close to the family. They noted Barry's behavior, his reluctance to cooperate at times, his strange explanations, his changing timelines. While the world prayed for Suzanne's safe return, police quietly began to suspect something far worse. Still, outwardly, Barry played the role of the desperate husband. He gave interviews, wiped tears, spoke of his love for Suzanne, and insisted that someone, a stranger, a kidnapper, a random passerby, must have taken her. But the evidence didn't fit the theory. There were no tracks, no signs of forced entry, no ransom notes, no suspicious vehicles caught on camera. The silence surrounding Suzanne's disappearance was too complete, too clean. In the following days, friends began to speak up. They described Suzanne as kind, spiritual, and loving, but also tired, drained. Some recalled conversations where she hinted that her marriage wasn't as perfect as it seemed, that she felt trapped, controlled, afraid. Those whispers began to form a chilling picture. Maybe Suzanne hadn't just vanished. Maybe she'd finally tried to leave. Detectives followed every lead, from digital forensics to cell tower pings, but the more they searched, the stranger the case became. Suzanne's phone was found in airplane mode. Her bike helmet was discovered days later, placed in an area that had already been searched. It was as though someone was planting a story, creating a scene that didn't exist. As suspicion tightened around Barry, he grew defensive. In interviews, his words shifted from grief to frustration. He lashed out at police, accused them of incompetence, claimed he was being framed. But deep down, even his own demeanor betrayed him. He wasn't searching for Suzanne anymore. He was protecting himself. Through the long summer that followed, the town lived in a state of tension. Rumors spread, families argued, and everyone wondered, if Barry didn't do it, then who did? And if he did, where was Suzanne? The once peaceful mountains became symbols of mystery and mourning. The beauty of Colorado's wilderness now felt haunted, a vast, quiet expanse holding secrets that refused to be found. The story of Suzanne Morphew was no longer just about one woman's disappearance. It was about the illusion of perfection, the danger of control, and the pain that hides behind closed doors. Everyone wanted to believe Barry S.'s story, that a loving mother had simply vanished into thin air. But deep down, people knew, mothers don't just disappear. They're taken, silenced, erased by someone who couldn't stand to let them go. As night settled over Salida once more, searchlights flickered through the trees, reflecting off cold mountain streams. Somewhere, beneath the weight of those dark woods, the truth was waiting. And the perfect life everyone envied was already dead. Behind every perfect smile, there's a story. Behind every photograph of a happy couple, there's a truth no one wants to see. For Suzanne Morphew, that truth was her marriage. To everyone around her, Suzanne and Barry were the dream, high school sweethearts who built a beautiful life together. They had money, a big home, 2 daughters who adored them, and a reputation as the perfect family. But behind closed doors, Suzanne's world wasn't peaceful. It was controlled. Barry Morphew was the kind of man people naturally respected. He was strong, confident, hardworking, a man who always had the answers. He liked order, he liked being admired, and he liked being in control. To Suzanne at first, that control felt like protection, but slowly, over the years, it began to feel like a cage. Barry decided where they lived, how they spent money, who Suzanne could see, and sometimes even what she could say. He wanted perfection, not love, not partnership, but power, disguised as devotion. Suzanne, once lively and bright, began to shrink inside herself. Her friends noticed she had become quieter, more cautious. She would smile in public, but there was distance in her eyes, like someone trying not to make waves. She began keeping a journal, small and secret, filled with thoughts she couldn't say out loud. In it, she wrote about her pain, her loneliness, and her fear. "I feel trapped," one entry read. "He loves control more than he loves me." Her friends say Suzanne was patient, too patient. She believed things could change. But when she began surviving breast cancer, something shifted inside her. Facing her own mortality had reminded her how short life really was. She didn't want to just exist anymore. She wanted to live. And that meant breaking free from the walls she once called home. But Barry sensed it. He felt her slipping away. The man who once praised her began to question her every move. He accused her of being distant, distracted, unfaithful. He checked her messages, followed her location, monitored her habits. He called it protecting the marriage. Suzanne called it what it was: control, the kind that suffocates. Somewhere in that fragile space, Suzanne found a small light, a connection to someone from her past, a former friend, someone who reminded her of who she used to be before the fear and control. Their messages were innocent at first, but over time, they became her escape. For the first time in years, Suzanne felt heard, seen, alive. She told him things she couldn't tell anyone else and that she was unhappy, scared, desperate to leave. Those messages became her lifeline, her quiet rebellion against the cage she'd been locked inside. Barry found out. Maybe not all the details, but enough to know he was losing her. And for a man like him, that wasn't an option. People who knew Barry said he didn't handle rejection well. He could go from calm to furious in seconds. Behind the perfect family photos, there were slammed doors, long silences, and moments of explosive anger that Suzanne tried her best to hide from their daughters. On the outside, the Morphew family still looked perfect. Suzanne still posted happy photos, smiling holidays, family outings, birthday cakes, but the truth was rotting underneath. Each picture was a mask, an illusion meant to keep people from asking the wrong questions. If anyone noticed the tension in her smile or the distance in her eyes, they didn't say anything. Because in small towns, people rarely look too close. They prefer the comfort of the lie. In April 2020, just weeks before she vanished, Suzanne finally told a close friend that she was ready to leave Barry. She said she couldn't pretend anymore. She wanted peace, even if it meant losing everything. Her messages to that friend grew emotional. She sounded determined but scared. She said she was planning to start over after her daughters finished school. But that plan never had the chance to happen. Investigators would later uncover digital traces of those conversations. Hidden texts, deleted messages, small fragments of Suzanne's truth scattered across her phone and iCloud backups. They revealed a woman standing at the edge of her freedom, and a man sensing it slipping away. In one of her final messages, Suzanne wrote, "I'm done. I can't keep pretending." It was supposed to be a turning point, a declaration of strength. But soon after, she went silent. Forever. Barry, meanwhile, would tell everyone that his marriage was perfect, that they loved each other, that Suzanne had no reason to leave. But investigators began noticing the subtle contradictions, the way he described her in the past tense, the way he avoided certain questions, the way his calm confidence faltered when her private messages came to light. The story of a happy marriage was beginning to crumble piece by piece. To outsiders, it's easy to say she should have left sooner, but those who have lived in the shadow of control know how it works. It doesn't happen overnight. It's slow, silent, invisible to the world. Control becomes routine, fear becomes normal, and the person trapped inside forgets what freedom even feels like. Suzanne didn't stay because she was weak. She stayed because she still believed there was a way out, a way that didn't destroy everything she had built. As investigators pieced together the fragments of Suzanne's last days, one truth became clear. This wasn't just a disappearance. It was the collapse of a life built on illusion. Every message, every diary entry, every deleted file revealed the same heartbreaking pattern: a woman fighting to be free and a man fighting to keep control. The perfect marriage wasn't real. It was a story, told through smiles, social media, and Sunday church visits. But the real story, the one Suzanne lived, was one of quiet suffering and impossible choices. And on the night before she vanished, that story reached its breaking point. Neighbors recalled seeing the lights in the Morphew home on late into the night. No one knows what was said behind those walls, what words were exchanged, or what finally snapped. But by the next morning, Suzanne was gone, and Barry was already telling the world she had gone for a bike ride. The mask had finally slipped, but too late for Suzanne to take hers off. Behind the calm voice and the perfect photos, the truth was screaming, and those who loved her began to realize something they had never dared to imagine, that Suzanne didn't just vanish. Someone made her disappear. By the third day of Suzanne Morphew's disappearance, the search had turned from hope to fear. The mountain air that once felt fresh and peaceful now carried a heavy stillness. Hundreds of volunteers had searched every trail, riverbank, and forest path within miles. Dogs sniffed for her scent. Helicopters hovered low and searchers called out her name. Suzanne! Again and again. But there was nothing. Not a sound, not a trace. It was as if the earth had swallowed her whole. The sheriff's department realized early on that this wasn't an ordinary missing person case. There were too many inconsistencies, too many questions that didn't make sense. Where exactly had she gone biking? Why was her bike found in a place that didn't match the story? Why were there no tire marks, no footprints, no evidence of a struggle or fall? And most of all, why was Barry Morphew's timeline full of holes? Barry told investigators he had left early that morning for a job in Broomfield, 3 hours away, and that he hadn't heard from Suzanne since the night before. He said he tried to call her but couldn't reach her. When he got home and realized she was gone, he said, he panicked and called police. But when investigators checked his phone records, things didn't add up. His phone had been pinging all over the place that morning, near home, near a construction site, and at locations that didn't match his stated route. Even more concerning, his phone had gone silent for several hours during the exact window when Suzanne likely disappeared. No activity, no calls, no movements recorded. Then, suddenly, multiple pings appeared in rapid bursts, like someone turning their phone back on and moving it quickly between locations. It wasn't normal behavior. Not for a man who claimed to be working steadily at a job site. The search of the Morphew home became more focused. Detectives and FBI agents combed through every inch: closets, garage, vehicles, digital devices. They found nothing immediately incriminating, but the absence of evidence was unsettling. It was too clean. No signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no blood. Just the faint smell of bleach in one corner of the garage, and a few items that felt strangely out of place. Then came the trash runs. Barry had made several trips to dumpsters that weekend, tossing away construction debris, food wrappers, and random household items. When questioned, he said he was simply cleaning up. But to investigators, it looked like something else. Someone trying to erase traces of a truth they couldn't afford to leave behind. Friends and family were interviewed. Everyone described Suzanne as loving, devoted, gentle, but deeply unhappy in her marriage. One close friend said Suzanne had been texting her just days before she vanished, saying she was scared. "He won't let me go," she wrote. That message hit investigators like a gut punch. It wasn't proof, but it was a window into motive. Barry's interviews grew tense. At first, he played the role of the heartbroken husband, cooperative, emotional, desperate for answers. But as the questions got harder, his patience thinned. He snapped at detectives, accused them of wasting time, and even suggested that Suzanne had been abducted by a stranger or wild animal. Investigators listened carefully. They'd seen this pattern before: deflection, control, and the subtle twisting of the narrative. In one recorded interview, a detective asked calmly, "Barry, if Suzanne went biking that morning, why isn't her helmet near the trail?" Barry paused. "Well, maybe the animal took it." "An animal?" "Yes, a mountain lion. Maybe that's what happened." But there were no signs of animal activity, no tracks, no drag marks, no blood. Nothing supported the idea. It was a story meant to sound plausible, but it only deepened suspicion. Behind the scenes, investigators began reconstructing the couple's digital footprint: texts, emails, Google data, car GPS, everything. Slowly, a chilling timeline emerged. On the evening of May 9th, Suzanne had been texting her friend, expressing that she was ready to leave Barry. Then, just after 8 p.m., she stopped replying. The next morning, Barry's phone went into airplane mode around 4 a.m. When it came back online hours later, he was already driving toward Broomfield. But here's what caught everyone's attention. When police examined the truck as onboard computer, it showed multiple short trips during the night. Short drives between the house, the garage, and the road. Why would someone be driving around in the middle of the night before his wife vanished? Barry had no good answer. Investigators also found tranquilizer material and a dart cap in the home. Barry was a hunter. He claimed he used tranquilizers on deer. But one expert noted that tranquilizer guns were rarely used by regular hunters. They were mostly for animal control. Still, the presence of those items raised dark possibilities. As the evidence mounted, the FBI began treating Barry as a person of interest. But they moved carefully. Without a body, they couldn't prove a homicide. Every step had to be perfect. They monitored his movements, traced his digital records, and quietly gathered testimony from everyone in his circle. Each new piece of information painted a clearer picture. Suzanne hadn't vanished into the wilderness. She'd vanished from her own home. Over time, Barry's mask began to slip. He grew angry at the scrutiny, accusing law enforcement of destroying his life. Yet his behavior contradicted his words. He refused lie detector tests, withheld phone access for weeks, and even hired private investigators to find Suzanne, though most of their leads only confused the case further. To many watching from the outside, Barry's grief didn't look like heartbreak. It looked like performance. Months turned into a year. Public interest surged, with online true crime communities following every development. Podcasts, Facebook groups, and YouTube channels dissected his interviews, studied body language, and debated theories. But for the detectives working behind the scenes, it was never about speculation. It was about proof. Then came the discovery that shifted the case again. Barry's truck data revealed a mysterious trash disposal trip across multiple towns the day after Suzanne went missing. The pattern didn't look like routine cleanup. It looked like someone methodically dumping evidence. Every lie, every silence, every contradiction pushed investigators closer to one conclusion. Suzanne Morphew hadn't disappeared by chance. Something terrible had happened, and the only person who could explain it wasn't telling the truth. But the hardest part of the investigation wasn't the lack of evidence. It was the silence. Without Suzanne's voice, everything was secondhand. Fragments of her pain told through messages, friends, and digital echoes. And as investigators stared at the empty trails and empty house, they felt the same chilling thought. Sometimes silence speaks louder than screams. In 2021, after nearly a year of relentless investigation, Barry Morphew was arrested for the murder of his wife. The evidence wasn't perfect. No body, no direct witness. But the circumstantial weight was overwhelming. The mask of the devoted husband had finally cracked. But even in handcuffs, Barry's voice was calm. "They're wrong," he said. "I loved my wife. I didn't hurt her." The detectives exchanged looks. They'd heard those words before, from too many men who loved too hard, controlled too much, and couldn't bear to let go. The case was far from over. The truth, like the mountains surrounding Salida, was still buried. Deep, cold, and waiting to be unearthed. When the handcuffs finally closed around Barry Morphew's wrists, it was May of 2021, 1 year since Suzanne had vanished. The mountains that once watched silently over Salida seemed to hold their breath. The man who had begged for his wife's safe return was now accused of killing her. News spread like wildfire. Television crews swarmed the courthouse. Reporters repeated the same chilling words. Barry Morphew has been arrested for the murder of his wife, Suzanne. For many in town, it didn't feel like justice yet. It felt like heartbreak all over again. Detectives stood behind their decision. They had pieced together a puzzle built on data, timing, and motive. The evidence was a web of small, deliberate details that, when connected, painted a horrifying picture. Suzanne's last text messages showed she was ready to leave. Barry's phone movements placed him in suspicious locations the night before her disappearance. His truck's computer logged strange late-night trips near the house. His cell went silent during the crucial hours, then burst back to life with unexplained activity. The smell of bleach, the tranquilizer material, the multiple trash dumps, each thread pointed toward something unthinkable. But there was one piece missing: Suzanne herself. Without a body, the case was fragile. Prosecutors knew that. But they also knew that silence couldn't last forever. They believed the truth was somewhere out there, hidden under soil, or rock, or snow. Maybe Barry thought he could bury it deep enough. Maybe he thought the mountains would keep his secret. Court hearings began in the summer heat, and for the first time, the public saw both sides of the story laid bare. Barry, in his crisp prison uniform, looked calm, almost rehearsed. He sat still, eyes fixed forward, jaw tight, as prosecutors described him, not as a grieving husband, but as a manipulator who could not stand to lose control. The defense painted him as a man unfairly hunted by police, the victim of a misunderstanding, a husband destroyed by tragedy. Witness after witness took the stand. Friends of Suzanne spoke through tears, describing her fear, her quiet pleas for help, her plan to finally leave. Investigators testified about phone records, deleted data, GPS routes, and the subtle signs of cleanup in the Morphew home. When prosecutors read Suzanne's final messages out loud, the courtroom went silent. The words were soft, but they hit like thunder. "I'm done. I can't keep pretending." For a moment, even Barry looked away. Outside the courthouse, candles were lit again, just like the first days after she disappeared. Strangers who had never met Suzanne stood shoulder to shoulder with her friends, holding photos of her smile. Her daughters, caught between love and confusion, walked in and out of court in silence. They were young, grieving, and torn by the impossible task of choosing what to believe. The trial was supposed to bring closure, but instead, it opened deeper wounds. Every new revelation felt like tearing through layers of the same nightmare. The prosecution argued that Barry A.'s motive was control, that he could not bear the idea of Suzanne leaving him for good. They pointed to his erratic behavior, his shifting stories, his anger when Suzanne grew distant. They said it wasn't a crime of passion, it was a decision. But the defense fought back hard. Without a body, they said, there was no proof of death. Without witnesses, there was no proof of murder. They argued that investigators had fixated on Barry from the start, ignoring other possibilities. And slowly, the weight of missing evidence began to show. Key witnesses contradicted small details. Digital data was complex, sometimes uncertain. Reasonable doubt began to creep in, like fog rolling over the peaks of the Rockies. Then came the blow that shattered everything. On April 19, 2022, just days before trial, prosecutors announced they were dismissing the charges, without prejudice. It meant they could refile the case if new evidence appeared, but for now, Barry would walk free. The reason? The snowpack was too deep in the mountains where they believed Suzanne's body might be. They couldn't search it yet. Without that final piece, they couldn't guarantee a conviction. In one motion, the courtroom emptied, the cameras faded, and the town fell into stunned silence. Barry stepped outside, smiled faintly, and whispered to reporters, "I've been wronged. I loved my wife." To Suzanne's friends and family, those words cut deeper than any verdict. The man they believed had stolen her life was free again, walking the same streets, breathing the same mountain air that had once been hers. But even as Barry regained his freedom, the investigation didn't end. Detectives kept searching. Every thaw brought new possibilities, every shift in the earth a new hope that Suzanne's voice might still be found. Months passed. The snow melted, rivers swelled, and once frozen trails reopened. Search teams returned to the mountains, combing through acres of wilderness. They dug, scanned, sifted. For weeks there was nothing. Then, one quiet afternoon, word spread. Human remains had been found in a remote area near Moffett, Colorado. The tests came back. It was Suzanne. The world stopped for a moment. Her story, once buried, had finally surfaced. The mountains that had hidden her truth for years had given her back. But what was supposed to bring peace only reopened the wound. The discovery came too late for justice, at least for now. Barry's lawyers argued that his prior dismissal barred new prosecution, while investigators fought to keep the case alive. Through it all, Suzanne's friends held on to one thought. Her truth had not disappeared. The woman who had been silenced was speaking again, through evidence, through data, through the persistence of those who refused to forget. Standing on a ridge overlooking the forest, one of the search volunteers said quietly to a camera, The mountains kept her safe until we were ready to listen. That line echoed across social media, across podcasts, across every corner of the true crime world. Because this wasn't just about one case anymore. It was about every woman whose voice had been buried under control, under silence, under fear. The truth was finally beneath the mountains no longer. It was out in the open. But justice still waited. Barry continued to proclaim his innocence. The legal battles dragged on. But the weight of what he'd lost, his reputation, his business, his family's trust, hung in the air like smoke that refused to fade. And somewhere in the stillness of those Colorado woods, the spirit of Suzanne Morphew lingered, reminding everyone that love without freedom is just another form of prison, and that the truth, no matter how long it sleeps, always finds its way back to the light. The discovery of Suzanne Morphew's remains should have brought peace, but instead it left behind a haunting question echoing through every courtroom, podcast, and living room that had followed her story. Will there ever be justice? Her body had been found at last in a shallow, lonely grave miles from home, buried in the quiet wilderness she once loved to explore. But now that peaceful landscape was forever changed. Every tree, every rock seemed to whisper her name. The investigators who stood over that site knew it. Suzanne hadn't simply vanished. She'd been taken, silenced, and hidden. And yet somehow her truth had endured. But justice still waited. When news of the discovery broke, Suzanne's friends and family wept, not with relief but with sorrow. They'd hoped for answers, but what they got was a reminder of everything stolen from them. Birthdays missed, milestones erased, memories cut short. Her daughters, once full of hope that their mother might walk through the door again, now faced the unbearable finality of knowing she never would. Barry Morphew maintained his innocence. He filed lawsuits, gave interviews, and insisted he'd been wronged by the system. He painted himself as a man destroyed by false accusations. But for those who had followed the case from the beginning, something deeper remained. A sense that the truth, though uncovered, still hadn't fully been faced. In the eyes of many, justice isn't just about conviction. It's about accountability. It's about standing for those who can no longer speak. Suzanne's case became bigger than the mountains that surrounded it. It became a symbol, a story about the darkness that can live behind closed doors, the danger of silence, and the courage it takes to walk away before it's too late. True crime communities around the world picked up her story again. Podcasts reignited the timeline, YouTube channels revisited the evidence, and advocates for domestic abuse victims began using her name as a rallying cry. A justice for Suzanne began trending once more. Each post, each video, was a promise that she wouldn't be forgotten again. In the months following her discovery, a quiet revolution began to form online. Viewers shared stories of their own, women, men, and children who had lived under fear, who had survived control and manipulation, who had learned too late how fragile love can be when poisoned by power. Suzanne's voice had sparked something far greater than one investigation. It had awakened awareness. It had made people look closer at the signs around them. Because Suzanne's story wasn't just about a missing woman. It was about a system that often takes too long to listen. It was about friends who see the pain, but are too afraid to intervene. It was about the countless lives hidden behind the phrase, "Everything's fine." And it was about the unbreakable power of truth. Even after her death, Suzanne's words still live. Her texts, her journal entries, her final messages of hope. They remind us of a woman who refused to give up on herself, who wanted freedom, peace, and love that didn't come with fear. Those words now serve as her voice, speaking for millions who can't. The prosecution hasn't closed the door. Officials say the case remains active. Evidence continues to be analyzed. More truths may still come to light. The world waits, holding its breath for the day when justice catches up with truth. But until then, Suzanne's name continues to echo, not in anger, but in purpose. Her story is a warning, a reminder, and an inspiration. It's proof that silence only protects the guilty, and that speaking up, no matter how late, can still shatter the walls of deception. If you followed this story from the start, you know the ache that lingers. You've felt the tension, the heartbreak, the disbelief. You've seen the mask of a perfect life torn away to reveal something far darker beneath it. And now, as we stand at the end of this journey, it is not just Suzanne Ant's truth that calls out, it aims a call to all of us. To the neighbor who senses something's wrong but says nothing. To the friend who notices the bruises, the fear, the isolation. To the family member who dismisses quiet cries for help. Suzanne's story asks one question that cannot be ignored. If you saw the signs, would you act? Because justice doesn't only happen in courtrooms. It begins in awareness. It begins in empathy. It begins when someone, somewhere, decides to listen. If Suzanne had been truly heard while she was still alive, her story might have ended differently. But through her memory, through this case, through the voices who refuse to stop telling it, she continues to save lives. She continues to speak. The mountains of Colorado may have buried her body, but they could never bury her truth. And maybe that's the most powerful legacy she could have left behind, that even in death she found a way to be free. So, to every viewer, every listener, every person hearing this story right now, don't let her voice fade. Don't scroll past her name. Don't stay silent when silence can kill. If you or someone you know is trapped in fear, reach out. Call, speak, share, escape. There is always help, and there is always a way out, because justice still waits. And sometimes it starts with you.